For famous men have the whole earth as their memorial. It is not only the inscriptions on their graves in their own country that mark them out. No, in foreign lands also, not in any visible form, but in people's hearts. Their memory abides and grows. It is for you to try to be like them. Hi, I'm Emily Maeda, and I am joined by Tim McIntosh for Hot Takes on the Classics. And that opening quote was from Pericles, as written down by Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War. And Tim, we have come to one of your favorite speeches in history.
I love it. I love it so much. Anyone who has not read Pericles' Funeral Oration, this is a great episode to get acquainted with it. And this is one that you can sit down and read in, 20 or 30 minutes. And if you get a good translation, you'll really enjoy it. So Hot Takes from the Classics, this is a show about the classics, and we're trying to make classics more approachable. And Emily, we acknowledge from the outset, it's hard to sit down and read Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War. That was our last podcast, right? It's not easy to just
It's long.
It's long, and it's not like a curl up next to the fire on a Wednesday night kind of book. We know that. But there are certain things, every once in a while, we'll get something that's short, that has really good modern translations that ease the reading. This is one of them. So if you're tuning into this show and you're like, you know what, I'm going to give one of these classics a real shot, I suggest starting here.
That's a
with
great
Pericles'
idea.
Funeral
Great
Oration.
suggestion.
So I want to start, Emily, by talking a little bit about who Pericles was. We're going to talk about the Peloponnesian War. Now, we talked about the Peloponnesian War in our last podcast on Thucydides, but I want to just surface it again for our listeners. The Peloponnesian War is one of the most famous wars in all of human history, probably the most famous war, with one exception, in the ancient world. Mm-hmm. Most famous war is probably the Greeks versus the Trojans, and that was our first podcast. That's the story of the Iliad, of Homer's Iliad. This is probably number 2 because...
Because why?
Because it's Athens versus Sparta. It's Athens versus Sparta. And these two groups of people still kind of capture our imagination because they're almost the opposite forms of life, these two cities.
I was also going to say...
Almost the opposite forms of life. Yeah, say.
Sorry, I was going to say part of the reason we also think it's so prominent is because Thucydides did come out in his argument that it is one of the greatest wars, right? So that's also part of the reason why we hold it.
Yeah, that's right. That's
because
right.
we wrote the definitive account that we still return to.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that made Sparta great in a second. And then we're going to let Pericles / Thucydides describe what makes Athens great. And I hope that listeners hear parts of Pericles' speech and just think, oh man, what an amazing place, what an amazing time, because it really was. But let's talk about Pericles first. Pericles was an Athenian general, an Athenian statesman. He was born 495 BC. He died 429. He's one of the great statesmen of all time.
He really is.
He's largely responsible for the full development of Athenian democracy. And just if you're new to kind of like the classical world, demos is a Greek word representing the people. And democracy is largely a gift from Athens. Now, there have been a couple of historians that Emily and I really like that are actually arguing the Christians and the Jewish tradition were a lot more influential on that than like we typically give credit for. But in the popular imagination, the demos is a gift from Athens. Democracy is a gift from Athens. Pericles made Athens the political and cultural focus of the whole, I don't know what you would call it because it wasn't a nation, all of Greece, a territory, all of Greece. He presided over the transformation of the Delian League. Can you Can you tell us anything about that league, Emily? I hate to put you on the spot, but Pericles really helped transform it into something that became the Athenian Empire.
Right. Well, the Delian League are those that Athens, because they're a great maritime power, they trade a lot, right? And so these are their trading partners. And I mean, this is a lot of what we talked about last time with Thucydides, these alliances, right, where they're the city-states within the Delian League are giving tribute to Athens.
Yep.
These are the people that Athens, or the city-states that Athens has to keep on their side during the war with Sparta, right? And this is part of the conversation that I referenced that I said I liked so much between Cleon and Diodotus. It's in reference to these relationships in the Delian League. Like, how are we going to treat these city-states? Are we going to be harsh with them, or are we going to be measured? So Athens is a democracy and also dealing with the realities of empire, which are tricky.
Very tricky. Pericles rebuilt, among the many things that he did, he rebuilt Athenian temples that were destroyed during the Persian Wars. He constructed the Acropolis. He built, this is really amazing to me, a golden statue of Athena. It was sculpted by Pericles' friend Phidias. And there lately been a little bit of critical inquiry about whether or not Pericles actually pulled off a pretty big embezzlement when he did that. Now, that's like a subject for debate, but I want to be clear. Our main information about Pericles comes from Thucydides.
It does.
Thucydides thinks that Pericles is great. And Thucydides, listen to the last episode.
Yes.
What should have been the opponent of Pericles, just according to family lineage. So the fact that he respects Pericles as much as he does says something about Pericles.
It does. It really does, because by rights, he should have been unhappy with him, right?
That's right. That's right. If you want a picture of the popular imagination's view of Pericles, just type in Pericles and you'll see probably a picture of almost like a Roman-looking helmet with a man with a big, fully woolly beard. And this is Pericles. And that statue of his bust is a very well-known rendering. I think it was not, I'm almost positive, sculpted during his lifetime. So it's not what he really looked at. It's an idealized version of him.
Which the Greeks
It's a beautiful bust. Emily, you were about to say.
No, I was just going to say that's what the Greeks loved. It wasn't necessarily exactly who Pericles was. They wanted to show who he stood for. And it's an idealized man, right?
That's right. That's right. What we are discussing today is Pericles' funeral oration. It's a speech that he delivered that Thucydides was not present for, but Thucydides probably took earwitness accounts, and tried to reconstruct the speech. Maybe he had a hand in kind of redacting the speech also, did Thucydides. But it's attributed to Pericles through the lens of Thucydides. The bulk of the speech is not about the fallen soldiers from Athens. That was the reason for the speech, but he doesn't spend a lot of time on praising the famous soldiers. He most certainly praises them. What the bulk of the speech is about, it's about what they died for. And what they died for, Emily, what was it they died for?
They died for Athens.
They died for Athens.
They died for their homeland.
They did.
Their patria.
They did. So before we get to Athens, I want to talk for a moment about the Spartans. The Spartans, I was a little bit mean to the Spartans in our last podcast, but I want to be clear. The Spartans are pretty awesome. I mean, there's a reason why they have stayed in our imagination. They're sometimes told as the bad guy because they're the enemies of Athens. They're still remarkable, Emily.
Well, I was just thinking of the word, if you want to say, you say someone is Spartan, that was such a Spartan decorating. And that what that means is austere and not very much, right? So we, in our popular imagination, the word Spartan comes with the freight of being told severe.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
that's how we take Spartan.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's what we live with.
There are reasons for that. There are reasons for
Yes.
that, but that's not the whole story. The Spartans, I think lately, Emily, have kind of made a little bit of a comeback. I know
Really?
that the movie 300 is not like still super popular, but I think that 300 kind of launched Sparta back into the public imagination.
I have no idea what that movie
Sparta!
is. What is that movie?
Oh, it's the story of the 300 Spartans that stood in the gap as the Persian War was invading on the beach, and they held it for I don't know how long, just 300 against an army of like 10,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why I think they've gotten back into the social imagination a little bit. They had a very rich, law-abiding, brotherly society. I say brotherly. I don't say sisterly society. It's like a hyper-masculine society.
Hyper-masculine.
Is that the right way to say it, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. When I read my children the story of the world, do you know the story of the world?
Yeah.
By Susan Weisbauer. In it, she chronicles the young Spartan's life, and that is the feeling. Like there is no compassion. There is no, oh, you skinned your knee. It's you skinned your knee. Sparta will survive, right?
Right. That's right. So
you skinned your knee. Good for you.
Good for you. You're learning something. You're toughening up.
Yeah.
They lived in dorms. Well, I'll back up. When their boys were young, I've got it, I think age 7.
Yes, it is age 7.
They were taken from their mothers.
Yes.
And they were put into what is functionally boot camp.
Yeah. To make them ideal warriors, right?
To make them ideal warriors. So that is what everyone is striving for. This is not about art. This is not about playing the piano.
You suckers.
You guys are weak. We don't even know what a piano is. It's about spears, swords, and hatchets.
Well,
That's
and
what we're about.
They have the dominant land army in the ancient world, right? So it worked.
So it's hard to mark. Yeah, it's hard to argue with.
They dominated everybody. It worked.
They lived these male cohorts being trained for army service in service to the state, lived in dorms, they ate in cafeterias, and they lived proliferate the Spartan way. They were stern, they were courageous, they did not believe in taking bribes. And let me just tell you, bribe taking and bribe making is like the way of all of like the human race. The United States does not believe in bribes, and we don't practice bribes. Go kind of anywhere that's not the U.S. or
100%.
Europe, and you're going to need to like be talking about bribes to get in and out of countries. Anyway, I know that's a big, gross oversimplification, but bribes are not a minority voice in world history.
Because other cultures value relationships over sort of this abstract idea towards, integrity, right? And that's part of the
attraction of a bribe.
Yeah, the commerce in those societies. So not the Spartans, but
But the others. The Spartans were known for a brief, terse approach to language. Let me give you an example, Emily. Philip II of Macedonia. Macedonia is just north of the land of Greece. Warned the Spartans that he would kill everyone if he was forced to come down there and battle them. And do you know how the Spartans replied, Emily?
I think it's a critical word. Yeah.
It's a critical word. So tell me what the critical word is. I'm going to read the statement. If you, if you guys don't behave, I'm going to come down there and kill everyone.
Yeah.
If is said to be their only word of reply. So from this kind of like notion that they're very terse in their language comes the word laconic. So someone who is laconic is someone who is terse of speech. And so laconic, Sparta lived on the island of, Laconos. So they're sometimes called in the ancient literature Lacedaemonians. So if you do want to read this and you get an older translation, Pericles in his funeral oration does not refer to them as the Spartans. He refers to them as the Lacedaemonians. If you're reading this and you come across Lacedaemonians, I think do a little bit more searching and you'll find a more contemporary translation that uses the word Sparta. I think it'll just be easier on your ear. Loquacity was considered unbecoming of a Spartan. Say.
I was just going to say, it's so interesting thinking about this, because by the time Rome rises to a world power, right? The East, Greece and Persia and all areas in that, the east of Rome, they are considered luxurious and, sort of swayed by riches and wealth. Isn't it interesting that sort of every rising power sees themselves as the most austere and Spartan to others? But isn't that, it's interesting to think about that. Because Rome just classified all the Greeks as wealth-seeking, pleasure-loving, indolent. Very fascinating. Keep going.
One of the founding fathers of America really loved the Spartan ideal. Do you know which of the founding fathers it was?
I think I know it from your show notes. Thomas Jefferson. Which is just really funny if it is Thomas Jefferson, because he is anything but that. Come on.
I know. Monticello was not a... it was not a cafe in a dorm. It was like a beautiful neoclassical Athenian structure.
Exactly. And he's
such a
quite
funny
about...
thing.
He is not laconic. He is very loquacious. So
he is very loquacious.
Interesting.
Yeah. That Thomas Jefferson. So... that is the backdrop for Pericles' funeral oration, because what he's going to do is he is going to sing the praises briefly of the fallen soldiers who were fighting against Sparta. But what he's really going to do is he is going to name the Athenian vision of what makes a good life. And he's setting it in contrast to Sparta. In essence, the real short version of the speech is something like, hey, Sparta, you think you're creating really great warriors? Guess what? We can still whip you, and we can play the harp, and we can eat olives while we're doing it. Okay? So just learn your lesson here. Yeah.
If you've divided, it reminds me a bit of the Japanese samurai, right? That to be, in the medieval knight, the ideal is to be a warrior who also, in peace, cultivates good arts. Yes?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
So Pericles is setting that standard now.
So here's what he says in the funeral oration about the Spartans. Quote, "The Spartans, from their earliest boyhood, are submitted to the most laborious training and courage. We pass our lives without all these restrictions, and yet are just as ready to face the same dangers as they are. Here's the proof of this. When the Spartans invade our land, they do not come by themselves, but bring all of their allies with them. Whereas we, when we launch an attack abroad, do the job by ourselves." We are great warriors. Sparta thinks they're great warriors? No. We're great warriors. We do the job by ourselves. Another quote from the funeral oration, and you're going to hear in here tacitly, it's not spoken overtly, tacitly you're going to hear the principle of democracy of each man, and I hate to say it, Emily, but it's still kind of each man. It's not each woman yet.
That's how it is.
Tacitly is his own master. So just the quote is a brief one. "Our Constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority, but of the whole people." And a little bit later, Pericles continues, "Here in Athens, each individual is interested not only in his own affairs, but in the affairs of the state as well. Even those who are most occupied with their own business are extremely well informed on general politics. This is a peculiarity of ours. We do not say that a man who takes no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business. We say that he has no business here at all. We Athenians, in our own persons, take our decisions on policy or submit them to proper discussions. In my opinion, each single one of our citizens in all the manifold aspects of life is able to show himself the rightful lord and owner of his own person, and do this, moreover, with exceptional grace and exceptional versatility.
What a great quote. I want to connect this. Can I just connect this before you go on?
Please.
To the quote that I read to you after Pericles gives his funeral oration, and then after he deals with the turn of the masses, Thucydides' little statement that says, what was happening was democracy in name, but in fact, domination of the leading man, which is what he says about Pericles. But I think in that speech, maybe this is part of his brilliance, is that he ennobles the individual to a greater purpose. Is that part of what he's doing? He's ennobling these Athenian citizens, while also there's this play between his great leadership and what he's calling them to.
Yeah, I think so. So here's what I think is going on with Athens at this time. What's going on is the Athenians love great heroes, right? Like you can just see in their writings, in the Iliad especially, like they love great men and they want to follow great men. But I think there's something important happening in the Athenian mind, which is we love great men, and there's the possibility that we have greatness within us. And I don't know that that is a universal sentiment at this time in the ancient world. Of course, some civilizations might have this. This is a real hallmark of Athens, that I have within me what it takes to be great. And yes, Pericles is a great one. I can aspire to be like him. We're actually going to hear that a little bit later in the funeral oration. Just to highlight this point, Emily, I want to tell a story from ancient Babylon when they encountered Greek mercenaries. So there was a Babylonian king who, after he went to war, he wanted to get rid of all the Greek mercenaries that he had hired, right? And like, everybody loves a mercenary when you're in the middle of a war and you need to defeat your enemy. Nobody likes mercenaries when the war is over.
Yeah, it's a bad deal being a mercenary after the war.
They're troublesome. Mercenaries are troublesome. So the Babylonian king thinks, all right, I've got all these troublesome Greek mercenaries. I know what I'll do. I'll just kill the head guy and the rest of them will run off. Head of the snake. Gonna chop off the head of the snake. So that's what he does. He kills the head mercenary from Greece, thinking it's going to drive the rest of them off. Instead, well, I'll just say, if it had been any other country, any other people, they probably would have just gone home. Our leader's dead. Let's go home, you know. Not the Greek. The Greeks didn't have locked roles. They did have roles in society, but they weren't as firmly fixed as other countries, other people groups. So when the lead Greek mercenary was killed, another stepped into his place, and the Babylonian king had not solved his problems.
Now, this is maybe something that's more Athenian, particularly than
just Greece.
Greek.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Because I think the Spartans would have definitely had a much more lockstep approach
more rigid
to
roles, maybe.
More rigid roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's really fascinating. Right. Even from this point. So the ennoblement of Pericles works.
Yes.
He calls them to be a better version of themselves.
That's right. Exactly right. Another quote from Pericles. Again, this is about singing the praises. This is a vision of what Athenian life is in contradistinction to Sparta. Here's the quote. We Athenians do not think that there is an incompatibility between words and deeds. The worst thing is to rush into action before the consequences have been properly debated. And this is another point in which we differ from other people. We are capable at the same time of taking risks and of estimating them beforehand. Others are brave out of ignorance. And when they stop to think, they begin to fear. But the man who can most truly be accounted brave is he who best knows the meaning of what is sweet in life and what is terrible, and then goes out undeterred to meet what is to come.
What a great quote.
That's so beautiful.
I think Aristotle says something very much the same. True courage is, it's not without knowledge.
It's not based in ignorance, because
yes,
like you know that feeling. I know that feeling of, I am going to rush out and take down the Titan, and then you actually see the Titan. You're like, oh wait, actually, on second thought, I think this is a terrible decision. You know, and now I'm terrified.
Yeah.
But the Athenians prided themselves in actually giving a rational conversation about whether they could do what they set out to do. A couple of more things that I want to highlight, Emily, and then I've got a hot take for you.
I want to hear your hot take.
Okay. This is something that is not just about the Athenians, but it's about Greece a little bit more broadly. And I want to highlight it because we're going to talk a lot about the Greeks on this show. They're so influential in the rise of democracy, of scientific inquiry, of a lot of the things that we consider to be the best things about modern life. Here's the thing. The Greeks invented play. I don't mean drama like playhouses, although they were certainly one of the early progenitors of theater, but they invented play. So this is from Edith Wharton. She wrote a book on the Greeks. And
Edith Hamilton.
Excuse me. Not Edith Wharton.
Yeah.
Edith Wharton's like a 20th century novelist. Edith Hamilton. Thank you. The Greeks invented play. So play is so natural to children. My daughter was just in here and she's roaming around, finding toys, making faces, vocalizing. But it appears that it was a kind of play was uncommon among adults in the ancient world. So here's a quote from Edith Hamilton. Quote, "If we have no other knowledge of what the Greeks were like, if nothing were left of Greek art and literature, the fact that they were in love with play and played magnificently would be proof enough of how they lived and how they looked at life. Wretched people, toiling people, do not play. Nothing like the Greek games is conceivable in Egypt or Mesopotamia. When Greece died, play too died. The bloody, brutal Roman games had nothing to do with the spirit of play. They were fathered in the Orient, by the Orient, not by Greece."
That is really interesting. We could discuss that for a long time.
I know. We could.
That is very interesting.
My wife is a therapist.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the things, her specialty is play therapy. And the kind of notion behind it is kids tell you the truth when they're playing. You know, there's something that when our body is in motion, solving a problem, competing, going on a journey, an imaginary journey, you know, this is when our lives really open up.
You're unselfconscious.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of saying it.
You're unselfconscious. Yeah,
yes.
I was thinking about this from a statement by Romano Guardini, who says that play is the foundation of worship, which is also really because of the unselfconsciousness. Because if you are unselfconscious. So, and I'm thinking of Josef Pieper and his stuff on festivity. Anyway, so many things to think about. Yeah, that's really we could keep going. Yeah. We should stay on more, but that's really fascinating.
Maybe if we do a season
on play. Do a season on play.
Or competition or something like that, that would be really enjoyable to talk about. So
what's your hot take?
It's time for my hot take, Emily. So here's my setup. I'm a creative director by profession. And one of the things that I do as a creative director is I write speeches, I supervise the writing of speeches, I work with presidents and with CEOs on the delivery of speeches. So I know and love.
So you have some experience with speech writing.
I've got some experience with speech writing. Here's my claim.
Okay.
Pericles' Funeral Oration is no doubt among the handful of the greatest speeches ever to be written. Here's my hot take.
Okay.
The Funeral Oration is the greatest speech to read.
Interesting. Well, have you heard it delivered?
No.
Well,
nobody's heard it delivered, right?
I know.
Like, whereas we've heard MLK's I Have a Dream speech also among like the absolute greats, not just of the 20th century, probably of like the modern age. Same thing. We have heard Churchill's "We shall fight them on the beaches." We have heard Churchill himself deliver that speech. If you haven't heard Churchill, go listen to it. It's so great because it's so dry also. It's like, it's just like very matter of fact, we are never going to give up. We will fight them on the beaches. But we don't know what Pericles sounded like. I'm gonna give a little more clarity to this. I think Henry V's Crispin Day speech, as written by Shakespeare, whenever we have heard it delivered by really great actors, so we kind of know what it sounds like. But I don't think of Pericles' Funeral Oration as a speech that we want to listen to.
That is
it's a
really
speech that
true.
we want to read.
That is really true. Well, and that's Thucydides, because he is reconstructing it, right? So you would have to imagine that Pericles' speech probably would have been more reliant on schemes and tropes, right?
Yeah.
Than actually what we get. That's a good point. That's a good point. I'm going to buy that hot take.
I love it. I'm going to give you one more reason why I think it's so great. And again, this is from my experience as a speechwriter and like someone who helps presidents and CEOs write great speeches. This speech is all about the thing that you want in any great speech. It's about vision.
Yeah.
It's a vision. It's not about what Athens does. It's about why Athens is different. It's about why these soldiers fought. It's about why these soldiers died. And that's what what is moving about a speech. Of course, you have to talk about the what. We have we invented the trireme, like the greatest battle boat of all time, but that's not what really makes people's hearts move. It's a vision of something that is great, that is either achieved and needs to be defended, like Athens in this case, or is something great that we need to strive for.
Yeah. Well, and I was at first thinking the best speech ever written. What are we talking about? But
once I qualified it, you kind of got on board?
Yeah, no, I buy it.
Okay.
I buy it because it is given in more of a prose manner. I mean, Thucydides, he's a great writer. He just is. He's got great things to say. Right, but you can imagine it being delivered. It probably would have been slightly delivered in slightly a different manner, right?
Exactly right. I think so. Emily, that's the end of my hot take, and I think we have concluded the show.
We sure have.
Thanks to Clark Stefanik, our producer, True North, our platform. Our music was written and performed by Tom Hagerman. We love hearing it. Emily, you have to catch a plane to England. I do not feel sorry for you. I'm really excited for you.
I'm going to leave plenty of time too, Tim. Don't worry.
Emily, that's a problem that we can kind of reveal to our audience a little bit later. You need to rethink your visitation habits to airport.
For another show.
for another show. Have a great trip. Thanks everybody for listening.